Okay, and we're back in Numbers 24, verse 20. If you remember, we left off with Balaam. He's overlooking the Israelites, and he's prophesying, and we're in the middle of his prophecy, and so that's where we're picking up with verse 20. And I'm going to start with this one.
Just 20?
Just 20.
Okay. Then he...
Sorry, ladies. Just in case Dottie...
Okay.
She's got a little cut on her leg, so...
I'm going to pass this down. Okay. Yeah. First aid for you, Dottie, in case you need it. Okay, so, verse 20.
Then he looked on Amalek and took up his discourse and said, Amalek was the first among the nations, but its end is utter destruction.
Okay, so this is the fifth oracle or prophecy, and it focuses on the Amalekites. So the Amalekites, if you remember, they were descended from Amalek, who was Esau's grandson. When it talks about the first among the nations, there wasn't a real clear picture about what that meant. It could mean the first of the neighboring nations that will establish a government, or they were the first ones to attack. They were never the most powerful nation. There were more powerful nations around. So the first doesn't mean they were the greatest.
Whose grandson was he?
Esau. So Jacob and Esau, that's where they came from. Now, the Amalekites will eventually all be destroyed. Kind of an interesting fact I found out is the Midrash, where the rabbis like to try to explain more things. They said that the Amalekites could transform into any animal. And they say that's why in 2 Samuel, when God tells Samuel, or tells Saul to destroy all the Amalekites and all their livestock, they think because the Amalekites might have turned themselves into cattle.
We have shapeshifters, cool.
Yeah, shapeshifters. Now, spoiler, Saul doesn't destroy all the Amalekites. In fact, the last Amalekite we ever run into in the Bible is in the book of Esther, Haman. Haman's an Amalekite. And he's actually, the reason he hates the Jews so much is because the Jews all but destroyed them. Except the king. That's who he's descended from. So we'll get to that in the future.
It's on her side.
So let's look at verse 21 and 22.
Okay, and he looked on the Kenite and took up his discourse and said, Enduring is your dwelling place, and your nest is set in the rock. Nevertheless, Canaan shall be burned when Esser takes you away captive.
We've met a Kenite before. Jethro is a Kenite. In fact, Moses is married to a Kenite. Not sure why they're coming under a curse here. Some say that it's because they were associated with some of the other bad tribes. But they were known to be friends to the Israelites. And this seems more like a bit far away prophecy, that they are going to be destroyed by the Assyrians. Asher is another name for the Assyrians. Now, the Kenites lived in the rocky hills of Canaan in the south, and so they seem to be kind of protected. But these mountains are not going to protect them against the Assyrians, and they will be taken away captive by the Assyrians. Now, verse 23 and 24.
Then he took up his oracle and said, Alas, who shall live when God does this? But ships shall come from the coast of Cyprus, and they shall afflict Asher Asher and afflict Eber, and so shall Amalek until he perishes.
Okay, so this is the seventh and the last oracle that he gives. It starts with a reminder of the strength of Israel because of God. This isn't for Israel's glory, but it's for God's glory. And it says some of these things are going to happen from people that are not close nearby, not in Canaan. They're going to come from the coast of Cyprus. Yours may say Kittim. That's another name for Cyprus.
Kidding.
Yeah. So, a couple possibilities here. It could be talking about Alexander the Great. He certainly is going to come through and take over everything in the area. Others say it's talking about the Roman Empire because they're going to do the same thing. And the important thing is it's saying the nation that's coming through is going to destroy the Assyrians, which is why I kind of think it's Alexander the Great, because that's exactly what he does. He comes in and takes over. But through this, we're going to see nations are rising, nations are falling. And the nation that's going to stay through it is Israel. Even though they're captured by the Assyrians, they're going to come back. And when the Messiah comes, it's God's chosen people that are going to survive. And that's a future thing, too. God's chosen are going to survive at the end of time. Okay, verse 25.
Then Balaam rose and went back to his place, and Balak also went to his.
Okay, sounds like everybody's going home. Imagine what's going through both men's minds. A lot of disappointment on both sides. Balak did not get his curse. He got the opposite. And Balaam didn't get any money. But we're not done with Balaam. He doesn't seem to go home right away. We'll see him in chapter 31. But we're going to see evidence of what he's been doing in chapter 25. This is a really sad chapter. We haven't seen the Israelites for a while, except from afar. Now let's get back to what they're doing right now. So verse 1 through 3. One of you two.
While Israel was staying in the acacia grove, the people began to have sexual relations with the women of Moab. The women invited them to the sacrifices for their gods, and the people ate and bowed in worship to their gods. So Israel aligned itself with Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger burned against Israel.
So my version, there's a couple words that I like a lot better in this. When it says they had relations, no, my version goes right out and says they were whoring. And then when it says they aligned, mine says they yoked themselves. A little bit stronger words.
Bow down.
Yeah, they bow down. Yeah. But then they yoke themselves. Yeah, no. Well, mine is yoking.
I see what you're
Yoking is stronger than all those other words. So through this time, as they were moving, the Bible says the Israelites camped as they were moving along. This time it says they remained, or they lived. They're putting down roots here, and that's not where they're supposed to be. They're setting themselves up for a long stay. It's almost an impression of if that cloud moves, they're not going to be ready to go. And this is where they are going to stay until it's time to cross over into Israel. The place, versions have two different words, either Shittim or Acacia Grove. This was about 7 miles east of the Jordan River and about 5 miles north of the Dead Sea. They are so close to the Promised Land, yet so far away. In chapter 31, we're going to see that this isn't just being neighborly, the Moabites coming in. This was these women sent in by Balak at the suggestion of Balaam. If they couldn't get to them through their God, they were going to get to them through the people. They couldn't turn God against Israel, but they could turn Israel against God. So in these next few verses, sometimes we're going to see these women called Moabites, and sometimes we're going to see them called Midianites. Again, and not a real clear explanation. It's probable that a lot of Midianites lived with the Moabites, and of course there'd be intermarriage, and so whatever it is, these women came in and really did a number on them. If you remember back to last week, part of Balaam's vision was that the Israelites were a people dwelling alone, meaning they were separate from the world. This doesn't seem very alone anymore. So these women come in and they seduce the men, and they seduce them sexually, and they get them to bow down to their gods. A lot of times in the ancient world, worship of a god and sex went together. They'd go in and worship the idol and then have relations.
An orgy.
Orgy type, yeah. And don't overlook the phrase, and the people ate. What have they been eating all this time? Ooh, they're invited to a feast. So they're hitting the men in two spots that through their stomach and the other thing. How could they resist? They could have, but it's so tempting. We've seen so many sins from the Israelites. They worshiped God in a false way with that golden calf. They sinned with their unbelief over and over and over again, but they haven't plainly worshiped another God until now. And this God they're worshiping is Baal, and this is going to cause trouble for them through the ages. Baal worship is ugly worship. Baal demanded human sacrifice. Of course, Baal didn't demand anything because he wasn't real, but they sacrificed, especially children, to Baal. If you had an unwanted child, easy way to get rid of it, sacrifice it to Baal.
Don't you think, though, that the Israelites may have been a bit confused with somebody like Balaam, starting out with one oracle, and by the time he gets through, it looks like, and it may be that the Holy Spirit is working through him, but
Doesn't say anywhere that the Israelites had any clue that Balaam had said any of this.
oh, really? Who was he
There's no
saying it
Israel. He was saying it to Balak. They were up on a hill.
to? Oh, he wasn't saying it to the Israel?
No, they were nowhere near. They were. He was.
Figured
They were in
there.
They were in the distance. Now, of course, we know somehow they found out because Moses wrote it. But at that time, there's nothing to
So
say.
they didn't know then.
No. They don't even know how much God had rescued them. And they have no appreciation for this God that keeps saving them over
By
and
this
over
time,
again.
they should already know that. No
They
matter what they heard.
Yeah. So Baal was the Canaanite fertility god. So they are going to frequently yoke themselves to this Baal because they wanted to be fertile. They wanted lots of children. It's also suspected that worshiping Baal required veneration for the dead. How did the Israelites feel about dead bodies? Not now. Now they're idolizing these dead bodies. So not what God wants at all. This Baal God is completely opposite of the one true God. Of course, this is going to make God's nasal really red and flare up like a bull. He is really angry at this. No, I don't think anything could make him more angry than turning to a false god. So what's the pattern? They sin and then well, no, there's no Moses kneeling now.
Something bad happens to them, they repent, they get back in good graces, then they sin
Yeah.
again, and then they...
Yeah. So punishment is coming.
I don't like
Next chapter. So verse 4 and 5. I think that's you, Rebecca.
Verse 4 or 5.
4 and 5.
And the Lord said unto Moses, Take all the heads of the people and hang them up before the Lord against the sun, that the fierce anger of the Lord may be turned away from Israel. And Moses said unto the judges of Israel, Slay every one his man that rejoined unto Baal Peor.
Okay, so this was to be a public judgment. It was a public sin. It couldn't be kept hidden. So open sin, open punishment. So first off, hang the leaders of the people, the tribal leaders. Now, does it say they necessarily were doing the
No, but they were responsible.
They,
The buck
yeah,
stops
we
there.
don't know if they participated or not. That's not what God is saying. These men were responsible. They were to stop the people from doing things. So the buck stopped with them. So, and they should have stepped in when the people started sinning. So how are they to be punished?
Off to their heads.
Hung. They're to be hung.
in the sun.
In the sun. Now, it's not necessarily how we think of hanging with a noose, because that's not how they would do things. So there's a couple options here. They might have been attached to the tree and left to hang there till they died. Or they could have been killed before they were hung up in the tree and left there as an example. How quickly were they usually burying people?
Oh, the same day.
Same day, yeah. They were, no, not this case. They were to be left hanging up there as an example. That is way different than anything that's happened before. And hanging on a tree was such a disgrace for an Israelite. Now, who else do we know that hung on a tree? Yeah. These men are hanging on the tree for their sin. And Jesus hung on the tree for our sin. So this hanging of these leaders was supposed to reduce the anger of God. And then the judges, who they figure were the priests, were told to go kill everyone that yoked themselves to Baal. Doesn't say how. The sin cannot go unpunished, though. It's like a cancer that spreads. Now, what you don't see, did they actually do it? It doesn't say whether they did or didn't. I assume they did, but it doesn't say that. There's debate about it. And we're going to see God's anger is not appeased. So there's a possibility maybe they didn't do it. Don't know. Verse 6 through 9.
An Israelite man came bringing a Midianite woman to his relatives in the sight of Moses and the whole Israelite community while they were weeping at the entrance to the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the priest, saw this, he got up from the assembly, took a spear in his hand, followed the Israelite man into the tent, and drove it through both the Israelite man and the woman, through her belly. Then the plague on the Israelites was stopped, but those who died in the plague numbered 24,000.
What a plague? Where did that come from? We didn't hear about a plague until it's stopping. So that's one reason why maybe they didn't do what they were supposed to do, so God sent a plague.
Or maybe they're using the plague to talk about these chiefs.
Maybe that's how, well, although the leaders are told, or the judges, priests are told to kill these people. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't kill by a plague. That's a God thing. Okay. Don't know. It's not clear. So
Psalm 106, 28, they yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor and ate sacrifices offered to lifeless gods. They provoked the Lord to anger by their wicked deeds, and a plague broke out among them. But Phinehas stood up and intervened. The plague was checked. This was credited to him as righteousness for endless generations to come.
It is. And we get more of that in the next set of verses, but yeah. So we know there was a plague. We don't get to see what brought it on. Well, we know the sinful act. So it starts off there. The people are weeping. Why do you think they might be weeping?
Because of their dead people. They're dead people.
There's lots of people dying.
Yeah.
There might have been fake tears.
There might have been, yeah. We're yeah. That's a good possibility. They could have been, all these people are dying. Don't let us die, or fake tears, or they could have been repenting. It doesn't say. It seems like up till now, this whoring they've been doing has been outside the camp. So this man, who we'll see his name Zimri in the next set of verses, he is so bold, and he brings home a pagan prize into the camp. He doesn't even try to hide his sin. Now, it's believed that this woman is a priestess of the Midianites, and that this man is a prince. He is a leader of one of the, well, he's not the leader, he's the son of the leader of one of the tribes, so he's kind of a prince. There's some that even said that when it talks about him taking this woman into the tent, that they're talking about the tabernacle, but that's only using English words. If you go back to the Hebrew, the word they use for the tent that he brings her into is a large vaulted tent. They use different words for the tabernacle. So that doesn't make sense. And where would the Levites have been? Because remember, they're guarding that thing. No one's approaching that thing. So it seems to be his own tent. So Phinehas, I'm going to say Phinehas, he is the son of Eleazar, and he is going to become the high priest. We'll see how he's honored. Jan's read some verses, but we're going to see in the next set of verses how he is exactly honored. But he cannot take this insult to God, laying down. So where's Moses and Eleazar? They're probably in shock. And Moses is really old, really, really old. Eleazar is probably pretty old. But Phineas, nope, he's young, able, and he's taking care of this. His name is an Egyptian name, and it means the dark-skinned one. So he was not acting as a vigilante, taking this on his own. He would have been one of the priests that would have been ordered to slay anyone that was whoring with a Moabite or Midianite woman. So he was obeying orders, but he's zealous about it. He is going to take care of making sure God is honored, and this is not honoring. Brian Bell says, a zealous man in religion sees one thing, cares for one thing, lives for one thing, to please God, to advance God's glory. And that's what Phineas is doing. So he thrusts the spear into the man and woman. It gets them both. That kind of indicates that he got them while they were doing the act. And this action stops the plague, which we didn't hear about a plague until it stops. And then it says 24,000 people died in this plague. In 1 Corinthians 10:7 and 8, Paul seems to talk about this incident, but he says 23,000 died. Does this mean that one of them is wrong? No. Most feel that the difference of 1,000 is 1,000 died by the hands of were killed, hung and everything else, taken care of by the judges and all that, and the 23,000 died in the plague. Or another possibility is that Paul says 23,000 died in one day. So the other possibility is that the other 1,000 died in another day. Either way, the Bible is not contradictory. Although, as a note, not everyone believes that the passage in Corinthians refers to this incident, like John MacArthur doesn't. He thinks it's talking about something else. Now, the killing of all these people was an act of atonement. It was not human sacrifice, though. Normally, atonement is, normally you're redeemed from sin through an atonement, through a sacrifice. But in this case, the ones that committed the sin, they don't need atonement. They're killed. So it is not a human sacrifice.
So the killing of those people in Israel was an act of atonement?
Mm-hmm. It is. It covered the sin by taking the offenders completely away. Mm-hmm. Normally, atonement covers our sin. Well, there's no covering. It's removed. Okay, verse 10 through 13.
The Lord said to Moses, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, is it my turn? Or?
No.
Oh. I was like, we were going to
You're so sure.
Go right ahead. It's okay.
I like the change in my voice.
You're so confident.
Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the children of Israel, because he was zealous with my zeal among them, so that I did not consume the children of Israel in my zeal. Therefore say, behold, I give to him my covenant of peace, and it shall be to him and his descendants after a covenant of an everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous for his God and made atonement for the children of Israel.
Okay, so Phineas is given a promise from God because of his actions, and this promise is going to affect his descendants. They are forever going to be priests. Through his family line would come all legitimate high priests. And this goes down to Ezra. Now, in the New Testament, the high priests bought their position. So they came from all over the place. So they are not descendants of Phineas. They're not even Levites, most of them. In Ezekiel, we'll see that this priesthood will carry on into the millennial period, the kingdom. Now, Jesus is not part of this. He's not descended from Eleazar or from Phineas. He is a special high priest. So God establishes a covenant of peace with Phineas and his descendants. And this is a peace that can only come from God. Phineas is certainly not going to have an easy life. But we're going to see him in several actions, and he is always righteous and good. It continues to be zealous for God. And we're going to run into him a few times. In that Psalm 106 that Janice had read, one of the things it talks about is that it was reckoned to him for righteousness, that his act, God looked at it and said, that's righteous. The other person that we hear about reckoned to him for righteousness was Abraham. So he's up there in pretty good company. I'm not sure why we don't hold him up as more of a hero. Why he's a lesser known person, because he was good.
We would have to tell the whole story.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Now, it says he was jealous. So jealousy can be a good or bad thing. It depends on what you're jealous for. He is jealous for God. And what that means is he wants people to only worship God. And so these people are not, and he is jealous for God. So these blessings are going to pass on to his descendants. And it says forever. Now we know everyone is responsible for their own salvation, but blessings sure can pass down to our descendants. Or curses. I'm sure we all want the blessing part to go. Now we're going to get more information on those two that Phineas killed. Verses 14 and 15.
Now the name of the Israelite who was killed with the Midianite woman, was Zimri, the son of Salu, a leader of the father's house among the Simeonites. And the name of the Midianite woman who was killed was Cosbi, the daughter of Zur. He was the head of the people of his father's house in Midian. Okay, so here we see Zimri is from the Simeonites, and his dad is the chief. And so he's committing such blatant sin where he should be leading as an example. Well, he is an example, just not a good one. But a way to be remembered throughout history. Yeah, not in a good way.
when we get into the next chapter, we're going to see a census. And one thing we're going to see is the Simeonite population is going to go way, way down. It could be that a lot of the 23,000 that were killed, or the leaders that were killed, they might have been Simeonites, because here's their leader as an example.
But they also could have been Midianites, right? I mean, whoever was Moabite.
Oh, but
I mean, whoever was there.
Yeah, they certainly would have killed all the women too.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then Cosby's father was Zur, who was one of the 4 Midianite kings, and we're going to see him in chapter 31. I keep seeing things that we're going to see in chapter 31. I can hardly wait to get to chapter 31. See, because it seems like a lot's packed in there. Okay, verse 16 through 18.
The Lord said to Moses, treat the Midianites as enemies and kill them, because they treated you as enemies when they deceived you in the affair of Peor and their sister Cosby, the daughter of a Midianite leader, the woman who was killed when the plague came as a result of Peor.
Okay, so here we see the women were killed too. But the emphasis is going to be on the Israelites being killed. So, harassing the Midianites. We're going to see, it's another chapter 31 thing. Going to be a lot of chapter 31 things. So, God says, harass these guys. It means to be narrow, or to make narrow, to make cramped or constricted, to hem in. They're supposed to just cause problems for these Midianites. And why the Midianites? Because their women were the principal tempters. And we saw back when Balak went to recruit Balaam, he had consulted the Midianites too. So they've been involved from the beginning. Okay, so there has been a lot of population change with the Israelites. And they need to get ready to go into the promised land. So God is going to have them do another census in chapter 26. So this is going to be another one where there's some verses where we're going to read the whole thing, but then when we get to all the tribes, it's like a formula, so we'll talk about numbers when we get to those. But verses 1 through 4.
After the plague, the Lord said to Moses, and tell Eleazar the son of Aaron the priest, take a census of all the congregation of the people of Israel, from 20 years old and upward, by their fathers' houses, all in Israel who are able to go to war. And Moses and Eleazar the priest spoke with them in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho, saying, take a census of the people from 20 years old and upward, as the Lord commanded Moses. The people of Israel who came out of the land of Egypt were.
I think you keep getting the half-sentence things. So, those 20 years old and upward who are able to go to war. So, who does that exclude?
The kids.
Kids. Women.
The priests who weren't allowed to go to war.
Yeah, no Levites.
It sounds like the old guys could go, though.
They're all dead, right?
They cap it off for age.
Able.
Yeah. So old people that are not able, disabled people.
But I thought they were all dead already.
Anyone 60 or older is gone.
Okay,
So,
okay.
yeah.
We're out of there.
Yeah. Yeah, this plague probably took care of all of the rest, the first generation. So, other than Moses and Joshua and Caleb, it seems like this old generation is gone. This is regarded as the turning point between the first generation and the second. God is beginning to work with a new people.
I guess that's why they took a census again, with the old.
Yeah, gotta know. There's a couple reasons they're doing this census. One, to figure out the military strength, although God doesn't need to know that. But if you were an Israelite and you heard these numbers, wouldn't that encourage you as you're going into battle? Because these are huge numbers. The other reason is they are going to be, their plan is to split up the promised land. So the bigger tribes get more land than the smaller tribes. So they needed to know how many were in there. Now, 38 years earlier when they did the census, it was also for military purposes, but not one of those guys was going to fight in Israel. So they may have fought some battles along the way, but they didn't make it to the promised land. So this is the one group where we're going to read the whole thing. Oh, and I get this, huh? Okay, verses 5 through 11. Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, the sons of Reuben, of Hanok, the clan of the Hanokites, of Palu, the clan of the Paluites, of Hezron, the clan of the Hezronites, of Carmi, the clan of the Carmites. These are the clans of the Reubenites, and those listed were 43,730. And the sons of Palu, Eliab. The sons of Eliab, Nemuel, Dathan, and Abiram. These are the Dathan and Abiram chosen from the congregation who contended against Moses and Aaron in the company of Korah, when they contended against the Lord. And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up together with Korah, when that company died, when the fire devoured 250 men, and they became a warning. But the sons of Korah did not die. So, in 38 years, their population dropped by 6%, which is a big drop. Again, it mentions Dathan and Abiram, who had worked with Korah to rebel against Moses and ultimately God. We saw that back in chapter 16. When it says contended, that's a really strong word. So that it's not a mild contention. It was like outright rebellion, and we saw that. From this we get that God does not abide rebellion. We've seen that. And here is where we find out that not all the Korahites died. We didn't see that back in chapter 16. Now we're seeing it. We mentioned it back then, and in Psalms we're going to see that they are choir leaders. So now we're back into the pattern. So rather than reading it, we're going to look at them as their numbers and whether there was a decrease or an increase, and maybe a couple little notes. So you don't have to read all those names. Okay, Simeon. They had a drop of 63%. That is you can imagine, huge drop. Let's see, they supported Dathan and Abiram back in chapter 16. Zimri, the guy that brought the Midianite woman into the camp, was their prince. So a lot of them might have been killed in that plague, but there might have been other reasons. If you look back at Exodus 16, there's one clan listed there that isn't here at all. It's possible they died out completely. Then we get Gad, they had a loss of 11%. Judah had a gain of 3%. Issachar had a gain of 18%. But they were a fairly small tribe, so 18% isn't as big of a number as the gain that Judah had with 3%. Manasseh. We see mentioned here Zelophehad here, and the fact that he had no daughter, he had only daughters, no sons. We're going to see more about that later in the next chapter.
Real quick, sorry. Issachar was an increase of what? I'm sorry?
18%. And I think I forgot to write down how Manasseh and whether they grew or not. I'll have to get back to you on that one. Okay, Ephraim lost 20%. Benjamin gained 29%. Dan gained 3%. Asher gained 29%. Something unusual about Asher. We see the mention of Sarah as a daughter of Asher. We also see her mentioned in Genesis 46 and 1 Chronicles 7, but she's only mentioned. It's really unusual to mention a woman. We have no idea why she was mentioned. What was special about her? She's only ever mentioned. Naphtali had a loss of 15%. So, verse 51. I think we're going to get done pretty early.
This was the list of the people of Israel, 601,730.
Okay, what is amazing?
Wow.
Overall, this is a loss of 0.3%. It is really close to what they were 38 years ago. So it's just a rearranging of how many were in each tribe. 5 tribes suffered loss and 7 gained. God is blessing or cursing certain tribes. We can see the tribe that got cursed the most. This is Simeonites. The number of fighting men remained about the same for 38 years. You might call it stagnation. They didn't grow, they didn't shrink. But it's really a blessing, because wandering through the wilderness for all that time, you would have expected humongous loss. It was not an easy place to travel. And God kept them blessed through all this.
I think Manasseh probably had the most, he had 64%.
Is that the one? That's the one I didn't have a number for.
So I don't know why they,
Yeah, I don't know what the number was.
there's a chart, I just had a chart.
Oh, you had a chart? Oh, okay. So they were okay, that's
They were
good.
64%.
64%.
They started out with 32,000.
Increase.
32,000 and they went to 52.
Increase instead.
Yeah.
To me, the numbers instead of the percentage, so going back to chapter 1 and comparing the numbers.
Yeah.
I'm more of a number than a percentage person.
Yeah.
Ephraim was what? I'm sorry. I missed that
Ephraim was
Minus 20%.
loss of 20%.
It's interesting, Simeon had a loss of 63%, Manasseh had a gain of 64%. So it is those,
Yeah.
those two.
Blessing
equal
here,
it out.
cursing there, yeah. Okay, verse 52 through 56.
My turn?
Mhm.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Among these the land shall be divided for inheritance according to the number of names. To a large tribe you shall give a large inheritance, and to a small tribe you shall give a small inheritance. Every tribe shall be given its inheritance in proportion to its list. But the land shall be divided by lot. According to the names of the tribes of their fathers they shall inherit. Their inheritance shall be divided according to lot between the larger and the smaller.
So all that to say, yeah, they're going to There's a combination thing where they're going to, the larger tribes get more land, and the small tribes get lesser land, but where in the country is going to be decided by lot. So the mention of lots, casting lots, is, they mention it 70 times in the Old Testament, 7 times in the New Testament. And in spite of all these references, we don't know how they cast the lots. They just cast lots. I suppose for the audience that it was being written for at the time, they knew. So they didn't have to explain it. Could have been like sticks of different lengths, could have been, don't know what it was. But for us, the closest thing would be like flipping a coin. Except God controls what's going to happen and where it goes. And what land each tribe is given is an inheritance. They are to keep it. They can't sell it. They can't trade it. They can't give it away. It has to stay within the family. And we got the whole year of Jubilee thing where if the land had been somehow lost by the family, it came back. Okay, Elaine, you got names. 57 through 62.
And these are those who were numbered of the Levites according to their families. Of Gershon, the family of the Gershites. Of Kohath, the family of the Kohites. Of Moriah, the family of the Moriahites. These are the families of the Levites. The family of the Libnites. The family of the Hebronites, the family of the Malites, the family of the Mushites, and the family of Korathites. And Kohath begot Amram. The name of Amram's wife was Jochebed, the daughter of Levi, who was born to Levi in Egypt. And to Amram she bore Aaron and Moses and their sister Miriam. To Aaron were born Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar and Ithamar, and Nadab and Abihu died when they offered profane fire before the Lord.
62.
Now those who were numbered of them were 23,000, every male from a month old and above, for they were not numbered among the other children of Israel, because there was no inheritance given to them among the children of Israel.
Okay, so before this, the Levites hadn't been numbered because they don't go to war, nor were they to receive an inheritance of land. They were to be taken care of. There were going to be cities they were assigned to. Verse 59 is all about Moses and his family. It's the only detail we get at all because it's Moses and he's the leader. And notice that the count for them is from a month old because it's not talking about going to war, where you wouldn't want a month old going to war. Okay, and then we'll finish up this chapter 63 through 65.
These were those listed by Moses and Eleazar the priest, who listed the people of Israel in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. But among these there was not one of those listed by Moses and Aaron the priest, who had listed the people of Israel in the wilderness of
Sinai.
I couldn't remember how to say it. For the Lord had said of them, they shall die in the wilderness. Not one of them was left except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun.
Okay, so this is where we see that the entire older generation is gone, except Caleb and Joshua. And it's interesting that they say the count doesn't include Moses and Aaron. And why is that?
Because they're the with the Levites? No, they're the leaders?
Because Aaron.
They're not going in the promised land.
Oh, that's right.
Aaron has already died.
Yeah, Aaron's gone.
And Moses is on borrowed time.
Yeah, Moses is getting really near the end. So, wow, we finished 2.5 chapters. So I'm going to go ahead and shut this off now.